Anyone can tell you the news.
We welcome Diamond and Silk.
Mark Zuckerberg will end up, and it's going to be a face without the book.
Book without the face.
Hey, Megan, how are you?
Now they're chipping away at the normalization of pedophilia, and the left is embracing this type of behavior.
We welcome Dinesh D'Souza.
I know I ticked him off. In a certain sense, it's a giant up yours to Obama, and that's why the left is freaking out over it.
Jack Kennedy and LBJ, Clinton, and the double standard from the left.
Yeah, I love how the left does nothing but push the most bizarre practices down our throats and up our tailpipes.
It takes a real man to tackle the hot issues that really matter.
Michael Hart is the man of this house.
Welcome to the Michael Hart Show.
News alert. We are monitoring a reported mass shooting at a mosque near the New Zealand city of Christchurch. Witnesses report dozens of shots fired and people fleeing the mosque. The shooter appears to be at large. We are still trying to get confirmation of some official details on this. Kristen Fisher is joining us now with this late-breaking story, and really, by the second, we're getting more information.
By the second, and the latest little bit is that the Associated Press is reporting that media in New Zealand is now saying that there has been a second shooting at a mosque. Very little details about that, though. We're still waiting for police to make an official statement, but a witness is saying that at that first mosque, many people are dead. This happened at a mosque in the New Zealand city of Christchurch. The witness says that he saw a man dressed in black enter the mosque and then heard dozens of shots and saw people running from the mosque.
Good morning. You're listening to the Michael Hart Show right here on the Heart of America Broadcasting Network. Yes, that was a report from yesterday as we have learned about another mass shooting. It's a little bit, I guess, fortuitous that we had scheduled our good buddy Dan Wos, our gun bad guy, to come on the program today to talk about some recent, discussions in New York in particular about arming teachers in schools and how that may very well create a shootout situation. It's also kind of odd that on Fridays we very oftentimes will do what we call our situational security broadcast, where we talk about these very issues. And as we were preparing for our conversation with Dan, we learned about this shooting in New Zealand that currently has 49 people dead, I believe, 22 others that have been injured. And so without any further ado, we're going to bring Dan into the program and kind of flesh this out, because we know where this particular debate is going, and we welcome author Dan Wos into the program. How are you, Dan? Good to have you with us.
Hey, Michael, great to be on your show. Boy, there's so much insanity going on in the world. Where do we even start today?
Yeah, and you and I, we were talking the other day about coming on and talking about what was going on in New York. And, of course, the politicos out there have chimed in with their perspectives on what is going on in as far as the gun debate. And, of course, AOC has chimed in and gotten herself in a little bit of hot water as well. And what's interesting is that whenever you have these type of events, you oftentimes have the discussion about, well, if there were no guns, but then again, the other side of the debate is, if there only were armed people, could we have prevented this particular event? Let's talk a little bit first off about, because I think it's almost the perfect segue to talk about what has happened in terms of in New York. And Cuomo had said something about the dangers of arming people in schools and how it could lead to shootouts. Let's start there and then kind of backtrack our way into what's going on into New Zealand and what the narrative is likely to look at. Can you explain what Cuomo's position is?
Well, Cuomo's position is always to talk down about, gun ownership. So what he's really trying to do is well, first of all, part of the red flag law. Let's start with the New York red flag law. They call it the Extreme Risk Protection Order, but part of it says that teachers it's now illegal for teachers to have guns in their possession in New York in schools. Now you got to back up though. We have to go back to the 1990 Gun-Free School Zones Act that Joe Biden introduced. That was, I guess, the intent was to prevent people bringing guns on campus. Okay. But within that law, there was a piece of legislation that said the schools could determine who would have guns. Like, in other words, they could arm the teachers, they could arm security, they could arm police, whoever the school district decided. Okay, so now you'd think that, okay, well, that's a great option. At least the schools can make that determination if they choose. Well, what Cuomo's done now with this new red flag law is he's written in the law that piece of the teachers having the option, of course they'd be trained and all that, that's gone. So what he's doing is he's literally trying to eliminate and pull the security, the defensive guns out of the schools. And it's so troubling. But what happens is it fits right into the gun narrative. Because I was just talking to somebody yesterday who said, we don't need guns in schools. And that's their position because they're so irrationally fearful over guns now because the media has perpetuated this gun fear. But the truth is, yeah, we do, because they're maniacs coming in who want to kill you and the kids. And by eliminating the guns just because you're irrationally scared of, fearful of them, that doesn't make any logical sense to anybody who can rub two brain cells together.
Well, it really doesn't. And then you bring in things such as what happens in New Zealand, and the details are just now coming out, and we're just now beginning to find out the extent and severity of what has happened over there. It brings up the argument if whether or not we should have people that are armed in the mosques, what that looks like, because it's also interesting. This is how bad it is in terms of New Zealand this morning, and I want to play a little clip here from one of the law enforcement officers warning people about stepping foot inside of a mosque. Check this out, Dan.
Good afternoon. Okay. I need to advise that this afternoon we are dealing with a very serious and tragic series of events in the Christchurch, Canterbury area. They involve an active shooter. They involve multiple fatalities. We have one person in custody, but we are unsure if there are other people. The multiple fatalities are, as far as we know, at two locations, a mosque at Deans Ave and another mosque at Linwood Ave, Christchurch. Again, we are unsure if there are any other locations outside of that area that are under threat. I want to assure everyone that we have mobilised every police resource in the Canterbury region to respond to this, and we were also in the process of mobilising every national police resource to keep people safe. But I also want to ask you to stay indoors if you're in that location, and I want to ask anyone that was thinking of going to a mosque anywhere in New Zealand today not to go, to close your doors until you hear from us again.
Now, I want to point out here that we're not even going to be able to go to a mosque if you're so compelled in New Zealand. It's possible because supposedly this guy, of course, the narrative is he's a white nationalist. But now we're getting this idea that we can't go to a mosque, according to the chief of police. So what is the answer, Dan? Because we're not going to get the guns off the street. People are so fearful now because we can't have weapons in these particular venues. And so now all of a sudden we're shutting churches down. Is that what this is going to have to come to in this country?
Well, when we look at the New Zealand gun laws, and I have to school up myself just a little bit, but they're talking like there was no self-defensive guns in this mosque. And I just read a tweet by Ryan Saavedra from Real Daily Wire, and he says, and I quote Ryan's tweet, "The New Zealand Herald reports that the shooting at the second mosque was stopped by an armed Muslim who chased the shooters and fired 2 shots at them as they sped off." Question right now for me is, because I haven't got all the data yet. The question is, was it a gun-free zone? If it was this mosque, the person in the mosque, were they carrying a gun illegally in the mosque? Did they use that gun for self-defense? And if so, is that okay? does that break New Zealand's laws? And there's a lot of questions still yet to unfold, but I don't think that there's going to be a whole lot of talk about a defensive gun in that mosque if this is actually true. I know that complicates the whole thing, but
yeah, it really does. And so, the whole conversation that I wanted to have with you today is, let's assume for 1 second that we are arming people in our churches, arming them in our schools, arming them wherever, the training that must go into that, because as you point out, the second one may very well have been at least slowed down, if not stopped altogether. And the debate which is coming out on the left, because they're so whacked out that, you've even got, AOC out there who is making these bizarre claims about the response and the Christian perspective. And I want to play this, and I want to get your thoughts. I know I've thrown a lot of stuff at you, but I really want to kind of give you an idea of what's going on. I don't know if you heard this. Now, listen to this. This is actually the Prime Minister in New Zealand. And it really is, it's heartbreaking when you hear this. This is Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, and she is making a comment that I want to kind of reference back to the wackiness of the left on this one. So hang tight with me. Just listen to this for just a second.
Do have one suspect in custody. However, there could be others involved. Also, there are multiple scenes involved in this incident as well, and police will be giving more details as they can as the situation unfolds. Whilst I cannot give any confirmation at this stage around fatalities and casualties, what I can say is that it is clear that this is one of New Zealand's darkest days. Clearly, what has happened here is an extraordinary and unprecedented act of violence. Many of those who will have been directly affected by this shooting may be migrants to New Zealand. They may even be refugees here. They have chosen to make New Zealand their home, and it is their home. They are us. The person who has perpetuated this violence, no place in New Zealand. There is no place in New Zealand for such acts of extreme and unprecedented violence, it is clear this act was. For now, my thoughts, and I'm sure the thoughts of all New Zealanders, are with those who have been affected and also with their families. My thoughts also to those in Christchurch who are still dealing with an unfolding situation.
Now, Dan, let me just kind of back up, because like I said, I've got 500 pieces of paper in front of me, and I'm trying to kind of get my mind around all this as it's breaking out. Now, you heard her reference several times that her thoughts are with the victims in New Zealand. Then you have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez coming out just after the news was released, slamming those expressing thoughts and prayers for the victims of Friday's mass shooting that killed, of course, 49 people in Christchurch, New Zealand. Now, a couple things. Number one, she's trashing the idea of thoughts and prayers. She automatically comes out and she says, at first I thought of saying, imagine being told your house of faith isn't safe anymore, but I couldn't say imagine because of Charleston, Pittsburgh, Sutherland Springs. What good are your thoughts and prayers when they don't even keep the pews safe? Which in and of itself is an ignorant statement. But in a larger sense, the Prime Minister of New Zealand never used the word prayers. All she said was thoughts. And so Alexandria Cortez literally changes the narrative. She is whining and moaning and complaining about something that didn't even happen. Doesn't that speak volumes to the way the anti-gunners process information?
Oh, definitely. They'll look at the situation and they'll pull out of it whatever they can to push for more gun restrictions so they can ultimately create their government-controlled utopia. But a big piece, a big component of those on the left, and I think you and Greg and I have talked about this, is that elimination, removal of God. And I've told you before, I'm not the most religious guy in the world, but I know when you denounce God, spirituality, that sort of thing, you it's easier for you to it's easier for them to want a more controlled society that's government run. So what she's doing is she's using the opportunity to denounce God with the thoughts and prayers. They look at that as a joke. The thoughts and prayers is a joke to them because they don't believe in that. They've been taught to not believe in God. So thoughts and prayers to them is a joke, and they want to make it look ridiculous. And they want to make it look ineffective. So that's part of it. And then in response to that, they'll say we need to actually do something. And what they mean by do something is more control over gun ownership. So that strategy there is pretty common on the left. So she twists the narrative to use for whatever purpose she wants.
But she points out the fact that and I know the whole thoughts and prayers thing has caught heat in the past. I get that. But, again, the prime minister never even uses the word prayers. It's not a statement of Christianity. But then Ocasio-Cortez makes it a statement of Christianity. And I'm fascinated by the fact that so many people on the left are so able and or willing to choose the narrative that they're going to moan about. And then there's people out there going, yeah, she's absolutely right. Thoughts and prayers never work. But that wasn't what the prime minister was even saying.
Right, exactly. Right. So she put that in. And you know who they're going to target. And now, until they find out who the actual person was and their demographic, their religious affiliation, or whatever, their political affiliation, the left is going to try to imply that it's white Christians who did this.
Well, it's absolutely mind-numbing. And, I know that there's going to be a political exploitation of these events, and that we're going to be hearing this. I just can't wait for the Democrats here in the States to come out with something about it as well, because at the end of the day, I just find it very interesting that, you and I were going to talk about this today, and then, we have this shooting which occurs, and as we understand it, the gunman appears to have live streamed the event, and apparently it was, in fact, now, he's in custody. Apparently, there was, in fact, 2 different locations. It was obviously against this particular religious group, and it seems to be something which is growing in intensity and frequency across the globe. And yet, you have these people here in the States because, you've got to bear in mind that, in New Zealand, they are a bit more restrictive on firearms than we are. As a matter of fact, considerably more. And yet, it still occurred. So if we were to apply New Zealand-esque gun controls to the United States, we're not preventing anything from occurring.
No, we can't. We never will, and we absolutely cannot do that. As much as the left pushes for it, we cannot let it happen. And not just as a left-right battle, but as a means to protect everyone. We understand this. We understand how important it is to be able to protect yourself. We understand that mosque or any church or any facility should, if not have citizens armed, have some sort of security, because we know that there are crazy people in the world. We can't let the left run roughshod over us in this argument, because they're doing harm for everybody. We must prevent them from getting their way on this. We have to fight back. Gun owners have to stand up and fight back, because it means safety for everybody.
So what does that look like when you have people such as Cuomo out there that are making these rash accusations that if you were to arm teachers in school, for example, what is it with this narrative about shootouts? Because they seem to always default to that.
Well, that's the scenario that scares people the most. They've created this Wild West scenario. I've talked about this before. They want everyone to think that if citizens have guns, that there will be these crazy Wild West shootouts, road rage incidents where people are getting out of their cars and just shooting each other, shootouts in the produce section of the grocery store, all sorts of mayhem and just outrageous uses of guns, irrational uses of guns. And they know that scenario that I just painted there appeals very well to the anti-gunners because the anti-gunners are already very fearful. They already don't have a clue when it comes to guns. They don't understand firearms and how they function. They don't own guns. They certainly don't carry guns. So they don't understand the mindset that goes along with gun ownership. So they easily kind of latch on to that colorful narrative that the left-wing politicians will push. The politicians understand this. The media understands it. The voters, which is really what they're trying to do, is trying to attract voters. They don't see it, and so when Cuomo does this sort of thing, he's really saying, "Look out, because these crazy gun owners want to create the Wild West, and you should vote Democrat because we'll protect you."
But I'm coming to you, as you're well aware. I'm coming to you from Alabama, and in Alabama, you've been down here several times. You spoke at the Bama Carry events, and there'll be 400, 500, maybe 600 people in a room with 400, 500, 600 of those people carrying weapons. We never see the scenarios breaking out that we hear from the left. There's this narrative that there's going to be, some kind of shootout or a gun battle between two law-abiding, gun-carrying Americans, and it never happens. The only time there ever is any kind of a shootout, or in some cases, I wish there was one, is between, to co-opt your book title, the good gun and the bad guy. And the narrative that they talk about, kind of like with Ocasio-Cortez complaining about the word prayers. I mean, she tweeted it. The word prayers was never even used. And in the case of the shootout, these things have never even occurred. Or if they have occurred, they've been very isolated. I mean, again, in Alabama, we've got some of the most open gun carrying laws in the entire United States of America. And, these things, yesterday I had lunch with a friend of mine, and we decided, to run out and grab a quick taco and just talk about, he's also in the media, just talk about some things that were going on. And he was going to pick me up at the house. He lives right down the road, and I slapped my 9mm on my hip. And it wasn't not necessarily very open, but, you could tell because I was wearing a vest. And we went to a restaurant that was pretty crowded, and I was looking around. Nobody gave me a second look because it's just not that uncommon, at least here in Alabama. So
that's true.
This narrative that there's going to be these overarching shootouts, they never occur, and historically they haven't. So how is it that this message from the Cuomos of the world is taking root? And then, dear God, what is the coincidental nature of having this thing occur in New Zealand, where all of a sudden, you're going to start having these wild calls for, the issue here isn't guns. The issue is prejudice and hatred.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I'm listening to you talk, and I feel the same way, and I hear the frustration and in your voice, and I get the same thing, and gun owners across this country feel the same way. We get so frustrated, but yet here's the thing: we still act surprised about how they can create this illogical narrative for the people who are following them or paying attention to them. We still act surprised. Frankly, Michael, we still act surprised. We shouldn't be surprised anymore. We should understand that the left has an agenda of getting rid of guns or controlling society. And part of that agenda must mean that they have to demonize guns and gun owners. So understanding that much, we know that they're going to do just about anything to instill fear in people, whether it's rational or not. So what we do is we try to approach the conversation. I can hear it in your voice. We try to approach the conversation with logic and common sense and understanding, and you can't approach this conversation that way. You can't approach and try to understand their mindset and their narrative from a logical common sense perspective, which is what we continually try to do. We have to understand that it's not irrational. And it takes another type of thinking to get underneath their narrative. And I kind of understand it because I was there for a short time. And I remember the irrational fear, which would cause me to want to just react. So I kind of understand it, and I think we can understand that irrational reactiveness maybe in other areas of our lives. I can't think of anything right off the top of my head, but this is the way they think. So to try to rationalize it and try to dissect it and try to look at it from a logical perspective, we have to stop that. I guess my point is we have to try to get under their illogical narrative and at least admit to ourselves that they're not looking at this from a logical perspective. And how are we going to help them see it,
Well, let me ask this, and I'm going to go all hyper-logical on you, but as I'm sitting here listening to you, we oftentimes hear people that are pro-gun that, we have a constitutional right, and we do. We also hear them talk about some of the things the Founding Fathers had to say about, protecting ourselves from an overarching and aggressive or potentially even tyrannical government, correct? That we have a right to carry, in part, because the Founding Fathers did not want a tyrannical government to overthrow the people, all right? And I think we both agree on that as well. Okay.
Sure.
So if you have the Cuomos of the world trying to strip away gun rights, keep us from protecting ourselves, telling us that government is our benefactor and that they are going to be our provider and our protector, and don't worry, we've got this. Is the anti-gun perspective from the politicians not proof that what we think in terms of our rights to protect ourselves from government is in fact true?
Well, it's a clear example of it, because here are the people who are supposed to be defending the rights and freedoms that our founding fathers laid out, and they're the ones telling us, well, don't worry about all that stuff. We'll protect you. Let government get big. Give us the power. Give up your rights to us, and we'll protect you. And that appeals to a lot of people. They don't want the responsibility of freedom, because every day that you and I walk out our front door, we have the responsibility of protecting ourselves. We have a gun on our hip. That's one piece. The other piece is you and I have a responsibility to provide for our family. We both happen to be business owners, and that's something that is inherent in us, where we take the responsibility of life. We take the responsibility of our families. We take on that responsibility ourselves, and we understand their consequences with that. And we're willing to pay the price when we screw up, but we also want to reap the rewards, and we expect to reap those rewards in a free society when we succeed. Now, on the left, they don't live like that. They don't think like that, and they don't approach life like that. People like Governor Cuomo understand this, so those left wingers are a target for politicians, because they can promise them all this stuff, all this protection, all this free stuff, free college, free healthcare, the whole package of ridiculous socialist policies, and there are people over there that say yes. Give us more, because they don't want to take responsibility for their own lives. They won't walk out of the house with a gun to protect themselves. They won't create their own companies, because not all of them. I'm just talking in general. You have to talk sometimes in general terms, but they won't do the things necessary that we will do often to take responsibility for life, the freedom that we have. They don't understand. The government is not going to protect them forever. They're only going to pretend to protect them until the government has complete control, and you can see what happened in Venezuela.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I find it so unbelievably troubling, because now, particularly on the heels of this complete, just heartbreaking disaster in New Zealand, that now this narrative is going to be amped up here in the United States, and, I might be stripped of my right, although, I personally have never carried a weapon in a place of worship. It's a mental thing for me. You know, I know there's a lot of a lighter and gentler Christianity today where we sing praise music and we can go to church in flip-flops. That ain't me. You know, I'm still going to be respectful. I might wear a pair of nice jeans, but I'm going to have some shoes with laces on my feet when I walk in the building. So there are certain things that, to me personally, that I have an issue with, and carrying a firearm into a house of worship is one of them. But if I wanted to, if I felt threatened, if I felt like I needed to have that protection afforded to me, then I'm very disturbed that there are people out there that think that I don't have the right. And we are seeing, I mean, you know, it's interesting, Dan, that, you know, we've got this reference to Sutherland Springs and Charleston and Pittsburgh, and this is Ocasio-Cortez. Our churches, our mosques, our synagogues, they're under attack. And all of the gun control measures in the world are not going to change that. And because there are Christians and Jews and Muslims that think like I do in terms of carrying a weapon in a church, they become de facto soft targets. And you have a lot of people in this country, and now the world around, that are looking towards God and faith and the lack thereof, in their opinion, as being the arbiter of all of their problems and all of their woes. You know, the other day we were talking about anti-Semitism and Ilhan Omar, and you know, we did a whole program on that and how so many people in this world and you know think that the Jews are responsible for everything, and then over here, you know, you can't trust the Muslims for nothing, and over here, you know, the Catholics hate the Southern Baptist or whatever the case may be, and you've got all this religious suspicion out there that is now somehow justifiable because it's what your God, air quotes, your God thinks you should believe in. And all of a sudden there's this quasi-justification of walking into a mosque and killing 4 dozen people and injuring 2 dozen more. And then the government comes along and says, hey, don't worry, we've got this. You're okay. Oh, and by the way, don't even think about going to a mosque because we don't know what the hell's going on. Sorry.
Yeah, this is good stuff. You know, it's good because we actually get to talk about, you know, how we really feel about this stuff, and the religious, you know, the religious conversation is a very complex one. I don't even know that we can get how far we can get into that because there's so many religions, and what you just pointed out that religions are always fighting against each other based on their beliefs and what's right and what's true, and how do you argue that? But I do know one thing, that human beings tend to need to know that there's some sort of a higher power, whatever you believe in, and what I think happens is, and that's God. You can call that God. When government comes in and does things, or certain ideologies come in and try to diminish that, some people go for it, and they do denounce God or higher power, their spirituality, their own, you know, their creator. And when they do that, I believe as human beings at that point they have nowhere to go, because I think we need to know that there is a higher power, a creator. And if we don't have that, where do we go? You know, who do we look to? What do we look to for assurance in life and in death? Well, the left knows where we should go.
Right.
To them.
Well, correct.
To government.
Right. Correct.
So, Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No. I'm just saying that's a big part of the strategy.
Well, no. I mean, and I hadn't really thought of it from that perspective. But in order to install or implement gun control measures, and the idea that government's got your back in terms of your protection, you do have to first destroy the church, whatever the church looks like. it doesn't matter if we're talking Christianity or Judaism or even Islam for that matter.
Right.
You have got to destroy the church in order to supplant government, which, in Islam, there's not a whole lot of light between government and the church, but certainly there is in the Jewish faith as well as Christianity, etc.
Right.
And so, it's very interesting that we're seeing this simultaneous assault on our churches and our Christianity and happy holidays and our faith from government. Simultaneously, we're seeing an assault on our gun rights, our constitutional rights. And as those two things have amped up in the last few years, we're seeing an increase in attacks, physical attacks, using guns against our houses of worship. It's obviously a byproduct of that two-pronged attack against faith and firearms.
Yeah, and then you'll also notice now we can bring back into the conversation the fact that the left, what do they say in response to thoughts and prayers? They denounce thoughts and prayers. So any opportunity that they can to denounce religion, they do it. That's why the thoughts when they say rubbish to the thoughts and prayers, that's why they do that, because it further makes it look ridiculous for people to look to God.
Well, I bet a bunch of people in that mosque were looking to their God just hours ago, and without the benefit of being able to defend themselves. So as we're having this conversation, as it relates to New Zealand, and then of course, we've got Cuomo that's concerned about shootouts in our schools. Do you think that these politicians, because I will tell you something about Democrat and liberal leadership, and I know it for a fact, they don't very oftentimes believe what they think you should believe. We saw this in the Hollywood college cheating admissions scandal.
Right.
How, they're always talking about, tolerance and parity and fight for 15, but I'm going to pay $6 million to get my kid, my bratty snot-nosed influencer kid, on a tennis team or whatever. And so there's a double standard between the liberal left elite and the lemmings that follow their narrative. And so, as I'm peering around these things, I have to wonder, Dan, if the Cuomos of the world legitimately believe the tripe that they're spewing, or if it's just a slogan and a sales job to get people on board to keep them in power so they can continue to strip the power away from the voters.
Well, I could give you the short answer, but let me ask a question. You said, do they really believe what they're selling? Well, let's look at capitalism. Do they really believe that capitalism is bad? I wouldn't think so, because they're engaging in it every day. They have businesses.
You're absolutely right.
They make millions of dollars, these politicians. So then let's also talk about so we can agree that they don't practice what they preach with respect to capitalism. Well, let's talk about guns. Do they really believe that people shouldn't be armed, protected with firearms? Well, no, of course not, because they have armed guards, and many of them carry themselves. So that's another do as I say, not as I do. And then let's look at the whole border controversy. It's a very simple argument. They oppose the border wall, but they have fences around their properties. They understand the concept that they don't want to let people in to their environment because there's the potential for people coming onto their property and into their home and doing harm. Yet they want people to come in the country illegally because they know that 2 or 3 elections down the road, those people, they'll be able to turn them into legal voters. And, of course, they'll vote Democrat. So there's a huge hypocrisy. They don't practice what they preach on anything. I can't see one area where they practice what they actually practice what they preach. So it's total hypocrisy on the left.
No, I mean that's a wonderful observation, and I just don't understand how, particularly when you're talking about the academic elite, how people just cannot see through that. But I guess you really and truly see what you want to see. Or for that matter, in the case of Alexandria Cortez, you hear what you want to hear. Because here she's, again, not to replay on this, but here she is complaining about comments made by the New Zealand Prime Minister that didn't even happen. And how is the woman that brainwashed? Do they have fluoride in the water in New York? I'm just kind of curious.
They must inject it. Yeah.
I mean, has she been over-vaccinated? Is that what it is?
I wish I could answer the question. I try not to give her too much attention because I think she really is just a numbskull. But
I got to tell you, Dan, as a friend, and you and I become good friends over the last. Because all I have to do is wake up in the morning and I Google Alexandria Cortez and half my show's done.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, that's a great point because she is entertaining. But realistically, I mean, how did she ever get where she got? I'll never know. But because there are other
payroll.
Yeah, and there are other very stupid people. There are stupid people in the world, and especially in that corner of New York, that will vote for her. So, yeah. Right. But as far as let's go back to the school thing for a minute, the university thing. Here's a situation, and nobody really talks about this, but those universities are an example of the popular table, as I talk about. And this is where all the elites get together, and they have their popular table, and they get to, their own little environment where they get to believe that they are, the best thing on the planet. Unfortunately, they have to eat from the menu at the popular table, and the minute they divert from the popular table or from the ideology that's at the popular table, they will get shunned, ridiculed, and punished. Schools, these universities, these Ivy League universities, are the popular table. They're the embodiment of the popular table in our society. So when I looked at this, when I first heard about this story, I said to myself, man, they are so desperate to be part of this elite group of people. That what does that say about them? The woman from Full House, I forget her name. What's her name?
Lori Loughlin.
Anyway, yeah. Like what happened to her to be so incessant about getting her kid into that group of elites, and what does that say about her? Willing to do that. I just think that it's really disgusting, and people will sell their soul to be part of a group because they can't stand alone. They're not independent at all. They can't go out into the world and say, this is who I am. If you don't like it, kiss my ass. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry for interrupting you because that's a fantastic observation. That when we say socialism, what we're really saying is not just socialize, but communism in terms of the word commune or communal. They really are a tribal bunch, and they really do have to belong. I see so many Republicans that say that I vote Republican or I think Republican, but they don't necessarily classify themselves as part of the Republican Party. Whereas Democrats do. Yeah. Democrats, my family's always voted Democrat. My grandpappy was a Democrat. Hell, I'll be honest with you, Dan. I don't know. My father and I were having a talk yesterday, and he made some comment. He's 84 years old. He made some comment to me yesterday about he just got out of the hospital. I had to go check on him, and we're talking, going back and forth. And he looked at me and said something to the effect of, hey, I don't know why everybody has to talk about politics. I don't know why everybody's out there on that social media and voicing all their opinions. Back in the day, we kept our politics to ourselves, and, we didn't say a damn thing about it. But I will tell you this, I'm 84 years old. As far as I'm concerned, Donald Trump is the greatest president in my lifetime. That's the first time I'll be 58 years old in June. That's the first time in my life I've heard my father say anything political, because he's got his viewpoints, but he doesn't run around screaming them because he's not a member of anything. Over here on the left, however, you're a member of the Democrat Party, or you're a member of the Obama, Organizing for America, or you're a member of the Clintonistas, or you're a Sandersista or whatever. People on the right, we're busy going to work and doing our things and voting when it's time to vote. But, we don't have time to be burdened with all this, this kind of intelligentista that's fabricated from the left that, as you point out, allows us to believe we're a member of something because we adhere to a viewpoint.
Yeah, and you use the word fabricated. That's absolutely true. And the ironic thing about that is that because they fight so hard to get into these universities, it cracks me up that what they're doing is they're fighting to get into these indoctrination camps that further their ideology. It's like they can't even see that what they're doing is they're fighting to get in to something and be part of something that is further cultivating them to believe eat at the menu of that popular table, if that made any sense. It's like if I noticed that I was trying to be part of something that was constantly convincing me of certain beliefs and certain things, I would be like, hey, no thanks. It's like joining a cult. And, once you realize that the people at the head of the popular table are starting to convince you of stuff, you say, wait a minute, this is a bunch of crap, I'm getting out of here. But they don't. They fight to be in it, which is the ironic thing. They want to be part of that because it gives them identity that they can't muster themselves.
That's very interesting. And that's, one of the things you and I have talked about over the years is how the gun control debate from the left is really, it's almost a mental health issue because because their thought process with reality, but it applies to everything else in the way they justify and the way they process all the other information. We're talking about gun control, but it could just as easily apply to healthcare control,
sure,
or border control, or any of the other controls that there seems to be coming from the left.
Well, yeah, the strategies from the people on the left, it's one strategy, and it's applied to all different causes. If you notice, they have their whole list of causes that they support and fight for, and you can take the same mind control strategy and apply it to any one of them, whether it's their abortion cause or their sexism, their the border, the gun stuff, whatever it is. It's the same technique used on them for all that stuff. It's amazing that they don't even see this.
No, it really is, because it's just like how many of the times that we heard, hear from Cammie Harris all the time about the Me Too movement and respect for women, and then we turn around and we're hearing about staffers that are leaving certain Congress people's offices because they were sexually abused.
Gillibrand, our New York senator.
Just happened a day or two ago, and I'm looking at this stuff and I'm just going, oh my God, it's almost. There's an aspect, I don't want to go so deep into the weeds to say there's an aspect of Lucifer in the whole thing, because I don't mean to imply that they're devilish, but I do mean to imply that there is kind of this sense of delusion and diversion that they use when they themselves are guilty. It's like the pastor that comes out against alcohol consumption, that they've been embroiled in an affair, or anything of that nature. Anytime somebody comes out and they're overt, that's why I don't preach to people about how they should behave. I got so many skeletons in my closet, I'm a walking graveyard. But the thing is, But you have all these people out there that they're espousing these certain viewpoints, and then at the same time that they don't live in accordance with what they say, but they expect you to.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because that's a very interesting concept. Why would someone who is guilty of something come out so fiercely against that thing? And here's my hypothesis. You see, if somebody is guilty of something, let's use the pastor who uses sexual impropriety. So if he comes out and denounces that sort of thing, because he knows that he's done it himself. I mean, you don't. I guess wouldn't be able to deny that. So he comes out and denounces it. Well, why does he denounce it if he knows he's guilty of it? Because if he can convince the public that he's a good person, then maybe in the process he can convince himself, or maybe he can, somehow by denouncing the bad thing that he did, maybe somehow then he's got retribution or something, or he's not so bad after all. There's a psychological component behind all that stuff that's really kind of illogical, but at the same time it almost appears to be like some sort of self-defense mechanism. If I can prove you wrong on something, well, then maybe I'm not so bad. That sort of thing.
Well, I heard somebody say some years ago, and there was actually a report on this, when you meet these guys, and I guess in some cases women as well, that are in their hatred for gays, that a lot of times that they're harboring latent homosexual thoughts.
Sure.
And so I think it's something, the parents along those lines. And that's one of the things I've always been suspicious about people that are hyper bigoted or hyper racist, or they're really super Aryan, or whatever the case may be, because all negative emotions. I'm fascinated by this observation here, and I don't know what it is, but I'm just not afraid of guns. I'm not afraid of having to defend myself. I'm afraid of the IRS, but that's about the only thing I'm really truly afraid of. But at the end of the day, we continue to have these idiotic conversations with people that haven't got a clue, and 49 people have just died. Whoa. So when are we going to put our political big boy and big girl panties on and understand we got a real problem in this world, and stop trouncing upon faith? Because as governments belittle faith, they literally are creating faith believers as potential targets. Because if I am disenfranchised from the world or reality, or have gone through a bad breakup or divorce, or a loss of a loved one, or loss of a job, and I'm being told by this government over here that faith is bad, why would I not lash out at faith-based organizations? I think government's creating this problem, not solving this problem. And damn it, it's time somebody has that conversation like we're having today, and owns up to the reality of the fact that it's all the BS from the left that's creating the BS that we're having to talk about on this program every single day, because they're too damn cowardly to admit it to themselves.
Yeah, no, totally agree with you. Let me add one more thing. Why do you think the left denounces racism so fiercely when, they're the ones actually getting caught doing blackface and all sorts of ridiculous nonsense? To me, it shows me that the reason they're denouncing it so fiercely is because they're practicing it. And they've not only practiced racism in that way, they now are positioning white people as the enemy. And it's just they are so they're so involved.
But Dan, think about what you just said. They are speaking out against racism, where simultaneously they'll scream about white privilege, which is racist.
Exactly. Michael,
how do you intellectually? How do you deal with that? How do you hold that thought in your head simultaneously?
And again, we're trying to analyze it from a logical perspective. It's hard. It's difficult to do what we're doing right now and try to unpackage this stuff. But it's clear to me that Democrats practice racism. They just do it in a way where they blame it on others. And we're standing here going, wait a minute, I'm not racist, and I don't know any racists, but yet you're constantly accusing me of being racist. Well, when you really look into it, they're the ones that are racist. It's so clear once you can see it. It's almost like you take the blinders off and you go, wait a minute, you guys are the racist ones. I can't believe we've fallen for this, and we've been on the defensive end of this argument for so long. So go ahead.
No, you go ahead, because I'm really getting on a roll here. So you go ahead.
No. That's it. I'm done. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I told you earlier about this conversation that I had with my father last evening, and I was asking about my siblings because, my family is so whacked out that, I talked to my mom a few days ago, and I'm like, Mom, have you heard from the girls? Oh, dear God, I hope they don't call. I mean, that's where it is in my family. So anyway, I'm talking to my dad last night, and, we're just kind of going back and forth, and like I said, he just got out of the hospital, so I was checking out his groceries. I was going to run to the store for him and trying to find out what's going on, and I asked about two of my siblings, two of the females. And, he makes a remark about one of them, calls one of them by name, goes, well, you're not going to hear from you because she thinks you're a damn bigot. And I'm like, okay, you know why she thinks I'm a bigot? She thinks I'm a bigot because I'm pro-life, I'm pro-gun, and I'm a Christian. So by default, that makes me racist. And I'm laughing, and he's looking at me, and again, he's so old, he'll say anything. Of course, he's the kind of guy that'll say anything all of his life. But, I mean, my dad, if you can imagine Archie Bunker and All in the Family, that's my dad, okay? That's my dad. But it's so funny. He's just like, yeah, you're just a damn bigot. And I'm like, where does she get this stuff? The girl doesn't even talk to me. She doesn't listen to me. And, I mean, I'm like, if your own father thinks you're a whack job, your mother doesn't want to talk to you, and you've blocked both of your brothers, doesn't that say something to you?
Yeah.
Doesn't that say you might need a mental health checkup? Which, by the way, this one's a psychologist.
Yeah. Well, oh, boy. See, that scares me right there, that she could have that kind of surface-level view of the world and be a psychologist. You and I
also on a faculty of a large university here in the state of Alabama.
And I don't want to talk down about your sister. That's not my place.
Oh, that's okay. I'll do it for you.
Okay. But, my 20-year-old son can be so insightful. And he says, Dad, I watch all this stuff. And people on the left, talking about people who have views like your sister, he said they just look at the surface level of the conversation, of the topic, of the narrative, of whatever it is.
They read the headlines only and not the article.
Yeah, exactly. They're like headline thinkers. They don't get down underneath that headline. And it sounds to me like your sister's doing the same thing. I wish that people like her could listen to conversations like you and I are having right now with a non-biased perspective and hopefully try to understand what we're saying here is that there's much more to it. And if you just look at the headlines in life, what am I looking for? Boy, Michael, this conversation's gotten very deep. I'm starting to lose my train of thought here. But if you just look at the headlines, you're not looking at the full picture. And it's sad because our government knows that people are like that. And those are the people that they target.
Well, Dan, not only is it sad, but it's criminal in the sense that if you're not able to delve into the reality and the facts, then you are not qualified to engage in the conversation or debate. And Are there things in this country that we need to debate and talk about? Sure there are. Does racism exist in this country? Of course it does, just not to the degree that's been reported. You know,
Right.
are there blacks in America that feel disenfranchised or, you know, left out or sometimes oppressed? I'm sure there must be. I've got several black friends that have expressed that concern and viewpoint to me. You know, do we have a debate about, you know, the sanctity and the preservation of life? Well, we need to be having those conversations because, you know, there is a medical aspect to these things. It doesn't need to be a governmental aspect. And, you know, it goes into gender issues. How can somebody be fluid on their gender? That's the single-handedly stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And if you believe that gender is fluid, you are by default a jackass and an idiot. But with that said, there are things we need to have conversations about in this country. But if you can't have the conversation with somebody else that's armed with opposing information or ideas, and they're just armed with opposing emotions and this inflammatory views on everything, then we are doing a disservice to the victims of so many crimes and human trafficking and abortion and so many other things in this country. We have people in this country, Dan, that are changing their sex because they think it's trendy. You know, it's gotten out of control, and it's time for somebody to say enough is enough. If you're a liberal Democrat, socialist, stop being a dumbass because you're only hurting yourself, you're destroying your family, and you're not advancing either the kingdom of the Lord or what this nation should be. And it's high time that somebody told these people to pull their heads out of their ass and understand there's a different point of view other than the one that's been installed in their otherwise concrete-filled heads.
Well, I think you just did. I think you just told them, you know, and the problem that I see, the reason that was pretty powerful, but the reason that they can't turn back, the reason that they're stuck to their beliefs, I believe, is because should they even accept other views, what does that say about them? And what does that say about them as a person and all the time that they've held their current beliefs? You know, that would mean that they've been wrong. And for some people to admit that they're wrong is the end of the world. And these are primarily people who position themselves as the intellects. Now, this goes back to the whole college thing. These people think that they're smarter than everybody else. They've got very expensive college educations, indoctrinations, and they think that because they're so smart and prestigious that they could never admit that they're wrong. So it all ties into itself. You know, the whole college mentality, that elite mentality and intellectual mentality is part of the glue that keeps them in the position that they're in, because should they admit that they've been wrong, that would be a devastating blow to everything that they've always believed in, and it would be a blow to their personal character.
Okay, now let's stay with what you just said for a moment and consider this. Because not only have we learned about this college admission scam, there was an interesting article that came out a couple of days ago, and I apologize, I can't remember where I read it, but basically it was about how what we are learning with Lori Loughlin, et cetera, Felicity Huffman, and the rest of them, that this is not necessarily new. Now, this particular event or situation or circumstance is relatively new, but there has been in this country for many years certain different avenues for which affluent parents can get their snot-nosed brats into an Ivy League school. And whether it was in the form of bribes or backdoor meetings or even court appearances where the parents have sued the school or even donated money to the school. So we've now known that for many, many, many years in this country, you have a lot of people going off into these universities that have no business being there. They weren't there on academic basis. They were there because mommy or daddy bribed or bought their way into the school. Now, what happens if that class of people, no pun intended, but that class of people goes on to run for elected office, or they go on to be some kind of other influencer, whether it's on Instagram or actually in the real media like the news? But the point is that if our college campuses are populated with populous people, and who does tend to gravitate? If you're already in the limelight and your family is moneyed, is it not truthful that if mommy was an actress, you might go into acting? If daddy was a broadcaster, you might go into broadcasting. Isn't it how frequent follow in the footsteps of their parents? So if you have these Hollywood sports elites that are putting their kids through colleges that they don't need to be in, then they're coming out and they're entering into fields that are similar to their parents, which makes them an indoctrinated influencer without the academic credentials to speak about the things they're trying to influence. That's dangerous, Dan.
Yeah, I know. Well, a lot of these kids are actually being groomed to go into government. You know, whether or not they're going to be senators, governors, and things like that, they often go into law and go to D.C. and they work within the governmental community. And so these colleges are more of a breeding ground or an indoctrination camps, I guess you could say in a lot of ways, for government officials. And so the way I'm starting to see this system is it is very, very scary that we as a society can breed these kids into these positions of government. And you know, in a lot of ways, Republicans, conservatives haven't been paying attention for a very long time, and Democrats have been very, very effective in getting these kids to think and believe the way they want them to. You say you can if you can change the way a person believes about something, you change their belief on a topic, you then change their daily thought process on that particular topic. We can use, we can use guns. Let's use guns for example because it's easy to talk about. Change their beliefs on guns to believe that guns are scary and bad and all that stuff. Well, now on a daily basis, they're running around and they're scared of guns, and they'll do everything they can. They'll vote for the politician that promises to get rid of them. You know, they'll turn in the guy they see with the gun on his belt. They'll call the cops on him. They'll do all these things that support their belief about guns. And there's effects to that stuff. So all you have to do if you want to change society is to change the beliefs of the people. And the best way to do that is to get them at the school level. And once you got them, you can control them and make them do and say and act the way you want. And that's exactly what happens. They leave these colleges and universities and they go into law firms. They do government work. They become politicians and they further activists, and they further perpetuate this left-wing ideology.
So we have generational poverty, but we have generational intellectual poverty as well.
I guess that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. Dan, unfortunately, we're out of time. I had intended to keep you on around 30 minutes today, and we've been here about an hour and 15, so we're cruising right along. And I appreciate you popping by. I'm going to wrap this thing up a little early today and, get on down the road. I got to go do something really conservative and make a profit. But I'd like for you to tell the listeners how they can find out more about you. I know that you do a lot of speaking. You are available for media commentary. And, of course, we want people to be introduced to your books as well. So I want you to tell everybody how they can find all about Dan Wos and Good Gun, Bad Guy.
Well, they can contact me through my website, which is goodgunbadguy.net or goodgunbadguy.com. And I talk a lot about how the gun narrative is manipulated by the anti-gunners in the media and with politicians. So I talk about a lot of these strategies so people can have a real understanding of what's happened to the gun narrative and what's happened to the left-wing anti-gunners psychologically. So goodgunbadguy.net, goodgunbadguy.com. Yes, I am available for speaking events and media. So all the contact information is on the website, And if people want to buy my books, they can also buy the books at goodgunbadguy.com, or they can go to Amazon.
Well, I strongly recommend that they do. If they are a supporter of your Second Amendment rights, then you definitely need to own one of or both of Dan's books. And if you hate the Second Amendment, you need to buy two of them, one to read and one to beat yourself over the head with. And so maybe knock some sense into you. Dan, thank you so much. We'll talk again this weekend, perhaps, because you and I got some other things we need to be working on ourselves, because somehow we got to break through this iceberg of ignorance and get people to understand what is really going on in the world around them today, because I don't know if the world's going to end in 12 years, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez claims, but I know intellectually speaking, we don't even have that long. And it's good, true, clear, loud voices such as yourself that is out there fighting the good fight, and we really appreciate you popping by today.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Same to you. I really appreciate what you're doing, and I think this conversation is a great start.
Well, it was definitely one of my favorites, and I appreciate you letting me get a little bit of my Friday frustrations off of my backside. So, all right, my friend.
Anytime,
I'll talk to you in a couple of days.
Thanks, man. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
All right. You guys go check out Dan Wos, Good Gun Bad Guy, right there, goodgunbadguy.net. You can also pick up more information on our Facebook pages about Dan. And if you circulate the Heart of America, this particular episode, and you listen to it and give it to your friends, there's actually a link to Good Gun Bad Guy right there in the description of the podcast. Even if you can listen live, of course, pick it up at Google Play, Apple, all the places, Spotify, all the places that our podcasts are quote unquote sold. Also, we'd love if you are a supporter of what we're trying to do here on this particular program, the Heart of America, as we continue to try to unindoctrinate people in this country. We would appreciate your support. You can go over to Hart, H-A-R-T, heartofamerica.net. Support us on the Patreon platform. If you're a business owner, there's a way for as little as $80 a month to get your advertisements on this particular show. I know I didn't take any breaks today because I always love talking to Dan. Every time Dan calls me off the air, sometimes he and I will go for hours. And so he's a great guy. Support his book, support his work. Because, folks, as you can see, we have a lot of work. We have a lot of work cut out for us, because at the end of the day, we've got an assault, folks, on our faith, on our churches, on our friends, and it's happening worldwide. And as you have a continued assault against your Second Amendment rights, we are putting those that are churched, regardless of what their faith might be, regardless of what their beliefs might be, we are putting our God-fearing human fellow beings into jeopardy because of our sometimes feckless approach to spreading the word and supporting the programs that are speaking the truth. So please consider supporting us at heartofamerica.net. And if you'd like to learn about some silly, crazy, revised history, support us over at theunknownamerica.com. The reviews have been exceptional. The children's version will be due out any day. Number 2 is in the works. But please support us at theunknownamerica.com. Pick up a copy or two. We'll even send you out a complimentary copy of the United States Constitution just for helping us out. And you'll learn a lot, you'll laugh a lot, and you'll be amazed a lot. That's it for us. Thanks for popping by today. We'll be back with you Monday at 8. Please spread the word. You've been listening to the Michael Hart Show right here on the Heart of America Broadcasting Network.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, click that subscribe button down below and also the notification bell to keep updated on all my radio interviews, TV interviews, and the Dan Wos Destroys, where I analyze and tear apart the anti-gun media narrative. My books can be found at goodgunbadguy.net or goodgunbadguy.com. And don't forget, your Second Amendment, it's not a privilege, it's your right.